the dawn of the Viking Age. The mist hung low over the fjord as the dragon-headed longship sliced through the grey waters. 40 oars rose and fell in perfect unison, each stroke propelling the sleek vessel forward with deadly purpose. At the prow, a bearded warrior gazed toward the horizon, his eyes reflecting both the rising sun and the promise of glory. The year was 793 CE, and the monastery at Lindisfarne would soon feel the fury of these northern men, the Vikings. The Viking Age erupted onto the European stage with shocking violence. From their Scandinavian homelands of Denmark, Norway and Sweden, these seafaring warriors burst forth in a wave of expansion that would reshape the political and cultural landscape of medieval Europe. Their superior naval technology, the revolutionary longship, allowed them unprecedented mobility. These vessels, typically 70 to 80 feet long and remarkably shallow drafted, could navigate both open seas and inland waterways, giving Vikings access to territories previously considered safe from seaborne attack. The longship was the technological marvel of its age, explains Dr. Neil Price, archaeologist and Viking specialist. Imagine a weapon that could deliver highly trained warriors directly to your doorstep, regardless of coastal defences or geographic barriers. Nothing like it had been seen before. The Vikings were not merely raiders, though their reputation for brutality was well earned. They were also traders, explorers, and settlers who established networks stretching from North America to the Middle East. Their society was complex, with a hierarchical structure governed by jarls, nobles, and kings, yet with surprising democratic elements in their thing assemblies, where free men could voice opinions on matters of governance. At home, most Vikings were farmers, craftspeople, and merchants, yet their culture celebrated martial prowess above all else. The sagas speak of a warrior ethos that permeated every aspect of society. Young men were trained from childhood in the arts of combat, and death in battle was considered the most honourable end one could achieve. A ticket to the halls of Valhalla, where the chosen of Odin would feast and fight until Ragnarok, the end of days. It was within this culture that a unique class of warrior emerged, men who embodied the most extreme aspects of Viking martial ferocity. They were the Berserkers, and their name would become synonymous with battle fury and superhuman combat abilities that defied rational explanation. The wolf coats and bear shirts. The word berserker derives from the Old Norse terms bear, and serk, shirt, literally meaning bear shirt, or one who wears a bearskin. Similarly, the Ulfhedna, or wolf coats, were warriors associated with wolf pelts. These were not merely descriptive terms for their attire, but signified a profound spiritual and psychological transformation that these elite warriors underwent. According to the Ynglinga saga, written by Snorri Sturluson in the 13th century, Odin's men went without mail coats and were frenzied as dogs or wolves. They bit their shields and were as strong as bears or bulls. They slew men, but neither fire nor iron could hurt them. This was called Berserker gang. Berserkers occupied a unique position in Viking society. They were both revered and feared, elite warriors often attached to the retinues of kings and powerful jarls, yet also viewed with suspicion for their otherworldly battle states. Archaeological evidence from warrior burials suggests these men received special treatment in death, often interred with distinctive weapons and ritual objects linking them to their unique status. These weren't simply strong fighters, notes military historian Dr. Lee Jones. The sagas describe them as transforming completely, entering an altered state where they were immune to pain, incredibly strong, and utterly fearless. Modern science might attribute this to a combination of self-induced hypnosis, adrenaline, and possibly psychoactive substances, but to the Vikings, this was divine possession. The physical appearance of berserkers was designed to intimidate. Many accounts describe them wearing the pelts of bears or wolves, with the animal's head forming a hood. Some went into battle bare-chested, or even naked, their bodies covered in elaborate tattoos and war paint. Their weapons were often oversized, massive axes and swords that required exceptional strength to wield effectively. But more terrifying than their appearance was their behaviour before and during battle. The sagas describe berserkers working themselves into a frothing rage, howling like animals, gnashing their teeth, and shaking uncontrollably. Once the berserker gang, the berserker state, took hold, they became seemingly impervious to pain, fighting with supernatural strength and ferocity that could turn the tide of battle. One account from the Egil's saga describes, "He began to howl loudly and bit into his shield and worked himself up into a frenzy. He slew men with both hands while neither fire nor iron could hurt him." This immunity to weapons was likely exaggeration, but contemporary accounts consistently mention berserkers continuing to fight despite sustaining wounds that would incapacitate ordinary warriors. Their fearlessness and pain resistance gave them a significant psychological advantage, terrifying opponents who believed they faced men possessed by spirits or gods. But what caused this extraordinary state? While some scholars point to psychological conditioning and battle trance, others suggest a more controversial catalyst: the deliberate ingestion of mind-altering substances, particularly the blood-red Amanita Muscaria mushroom. The red mushroom of madness. Deep in the pine forests of northern Europe grows a distinctive mushroom with a bright red cap spotted with white flecks, Amanita muscaria, commonly known as fly agaric. This fungus has featured prominently in shamanic traditions across the northern hemisphere for thousands of years, and compelling evidence suggests it played a crucial role in berserker battle preparation. The connection between berserkers and this mushroom is not merely speculative. Ethnobotanist Kevin Feeney explains, "The symptoms described in the sagas, increased strength, diminished pain sensation, altered perception, and animalistic behaviour, align remarkably well with the known effects of Amanita muscaria when prepared and consumed in specific ways." The mushroom contains several psychoactive compounds, including muscimol and ibotenic acid, which can produce effects ranging from euphoria and increased physical strength to visual distortions and dissociative states. Most significantly for warriors, it can dramatically reduce the sensation of pain while inducing a state of fearless aggression. Preparing Amanita muscaria was a complex process. The raw mushroom contains toxins that can cause severe nausea, vomiting, and potentially fatal reactions if consumed incorrectly. Viking shamans likely employed careful drying techniques to convert the more toxic ibotenic acid into the psychoactive muscimol. Some evidence suggests the mushrooms were sometimes steeped in alcohol, creating a potent mead that enhanced and directed the psychoactive effects toward battle fury rather than mere intoxication. The timing was crucial, notes ethnopharmacologist Dr. Sven Eriksson. Consume it too early, and the warrior might be incapacitated when battle began. Too late, and the effects wouldn't manifest in time. The berserkers' handlers, often shamanic practitioners, would have carefully controlled dosage and timing to ensure peak effect coincided with combat. Not all scholars accept the mushroom theory. Some point to the lack of explicit written records directly connecting berserkers to Amanita muscaria. However, the circumstantial evidence is compelling. The mushroom grows abundantly in precisely the regions where berserker traditions were strongest. Moreover, the symptoms described in multiple independent sources match the known effects of the fungus with remarkable precision. Archaeological findings lend further support. Several Viking Age artifacts depict warriors in trance-like states alongside mushroom imagery. A notable example is the Oseberg tapestry, which shows figures in what appears to be ritual procession with mushroom-like objects. While not definitive proof, these artistic representations suggest a connection between warrior cults and fungal consumption. The use of mind-altering substances in warfare is not unique to Vikings. Throughout history, warriors from various cultures have employed everything from alcohol to coca leaves to enhance combat performance. What makes the berserker tradition remarkable is the sophisticated understanding of dosage, preparation, and timing that would have been necessary to produce the specific battle state described in the sagas. This pharmacological approach was inseparable from spiritual beliefs. The Berserkers didn't view mushroom consumption as mere chemical enhancement, but as a sacred ritual that opened them to possession by divine or animal spirits, a direct connection to Odin, the god of battle ecstasy and shamanic wisdom. Odin's chosen, the spiritual dimension. In the heart of Asgard, the realm of the Norse gods, stands Valhalla, the Hall of the Slain. Here, Odin All-Father presides over his chosen warriors, the Einherjar, who feast and fight each day, preparing for the final battle of Ragnarok. For the Berserkers, this wasn't merely mythology, but a living reality they sought to embody through their battle practices. Odin himself was associated with ecstatic, altered states. The god sacrificed himself upon Yggdrasil, the World Tree, hanging for 9 days and nights to gain wisdom and knowledge of the runes. This shamanic ordeal parallels the Berserkers' own transformation through ritual and possibly substances. As Odin transcended normal consciousness through ordeal, so too did his most devoted warriors. The Berserkers weren't just elite fighters, explains religious historian Dr. Maria Kvilhaug. They were participating in a form of embodied religious practice. By entering the Berserker gang, they believed they were literally becoming possessed by Odin or by animal spirits associated with him, particularly bears and wolves. This spiritual dimension is evident in the pre-battle rituals described in various sagas. Berserkers would often engage in elaborate ceremonies, including animal mimicry, rhythmic dancing and chanting designed to invoke the presence of their patron deity. These practices, combined with possible mushroom consumption, created a powerful psychological framework that facilitated the transformation from man to something perceived as more than human. The religious significance extended beyond battle preparation. Berserkers often served as guardians of sacred sites and participated in religious ceremonies during peacetime. Some evidence suggests they fulfilled shamanistic roles within their communities, mediating between the human world and the divine through their ability to cross consciousness thresholds. The animal pelts they wore were more than tactical intimidation. They represented a literal transformation, the berserker taking on the essence of the animal, a practice known as shape-shifting in numerous shamanic traditions. By wearing the skin of a bear or wolf, the warrior symbolically absorbed the creature's attributes, the bear's strength and ferocity, or the wolf's pack loyalty and hunting prowess. This spiritual framework provided psychological benefits beyond mere belief. By conceptualizing their battle state as divine possession rather than self-induced frenzy, berserkers could mentally separate their actions in combat from their everyday identity. This compartmentalization allowed them to engage in extreme violence without the psychological trauma that might otherwise result. For the berserker, death in battle was the ultimate aspiration. To fall fighting meant being chosen by Odin's Valkyries, the divine female figures who selected worthy warriors from the battlefield and transported to Valhalla. This belief created warriors who not only didn't fear death, but actively embraced the possibility, making them extraordinarily dangerous opponents. Perhaps no single battle better exemplifies the berserker ethos than the legendary last stand at Stamford Bridge, a moment when a single warrior embodied the full measure of berserker fury and forever etched their legacy into the annals of history. The Last Stand, the Berserker at Stamford Bridge, September 25th, 1066. The wooden bridge spanning the River Derwent near the village of Stamford became the stage for one of history's most remarkable last stands. King Harald Hardrada of Norway had invaded England with a force of around 9,000 warriors, initially achieving victory at the Battle of Fulford. But King Harold Godwinson of England force-marched his army north with astonishing speed, catching the Norse invaders by surprise. The Vikings had left their armour aboard their ships, expecting negotiations rather than immediate battle. When Harold's forces appeared suddenly, the Norsemen found themselves at a severe disadvantage, separated from much of their army by the river with only the narrow bridge connecting them to reinforcements. What happened next is recorded in the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle and several Norse sagas. As the bulk of the Viking army scrambled to form a defensive line, a single berserker stepped onto the bridge. The Anglo-Saxon Chronicle describes him as a Norwegian of great stature and strength, while later Norse accounts embellish the tale, describing him as a massive warrior wielding a Dane axe, a weapon so large it required 2 hands to wield effectively. Some accounts claim he wore no armour, only a bear pelt, his eyes wild with battle fury. For hours, some accounts say as many as 3, this lone warrior held the bridge against the entire English army. Each time soldiers approached, the berserker's axe would swing in devastating arcs, sending bodies tumbling into the river below. The narrow bridge allowed only 3 or 4 men to approach at once, negating the English advantage in numbers. The saga accounts describe the berserker as fighting with inhuman endurance, seemingly impervious to fatigue or fear. His success bought crucial time for the Viking army to organise their shield wall on the far bank, potentially saving thousands of lives. What we're seeing here is the berserker ideal in its purest form, explains military historian Dr. Thomas Williams. A single warrior, likely in an altered state of consciousness, performing feats of combat that defy normal human limitations. Whether through pharmacological assistance, psychological conditioning, or sheer will, this unnamed warrior achieved something extraordinary. The berserker's stand ended not through defeat in direct combat, but through cunning. Unable to overcome him in direct confrontation, the English devised a strategy. A soldier floated beneath the bridge in a half-barrel or small boat and thrust a spear up through the wooden slats, wounding the berserker from below. Only then, compromised by this wound, could the English warriors overcome him. Even in death, the berserker's impact was profound. His delaying action had given the Viking army time to prepare, making the ensuing battle far more costly for the English than it might have been. Though Harold Hardrada would fall that day and the invasion would fail, the berserker's stand became legendary, a perfect encapsulation of the warrior ethos that defined the Viking Age. King Harold Godwinson had little time to savour his victory. 3 days later, William of Normandy would land on England's southern coast, and Harold would be forced to march his battle-weary troops south to face a new threat at Hastings, a battle that would change English history forever. The berserker at Stamford Bridge represented not just the pinnacle of this warrior tradition, but also its twilight. Within decades, the practice would begin to fade from Norse culture, a victim of changing times and religious transformation. The fading of the bear shirts. As the 11th century progressed, the berserker tradition began a steady decline. Multiple factors contributed to their disappearance from the battlefield, and eventually from Norse society entirely. Chief among these was the spread of Christianity throughout Scandinavia. Christian missionaries had been working to convert the Norse peoples since the 8th century, but it was in the late 10th and early 11th centuries that Christianity began to take firm hold. Kings like Olaf Tryggvason and Olaf Haraldsson, later Saint Olaf of Norway, Knut the Great of Denmark, and others embraced the new faith and actively worked to suppress pagan practices. The berserkers, with their deep connections to Odin worship and possibly psychoactive ritual substances, represented everything the church sought to eliminate. Laws began to appear specifically targeting berserker practices. The Gragars, Iceland's medieval legal code, eventually included provisions that made going berserk a crime punishable by outlawry or exile. The church viewed berserkers as embodiments of pagan excess, explains religious historian Dr. Anders Winroth. Their rituals, their altered states, their animal associations, all of this was recast as demonic rather than divine. What had once been seen as godly possession became demonic possession in Christian eyes. Beyond religious changes, evolving military tactics also contributed to the berserkers' obsolescence. As the Viking Age progressed, warfare became increasingly dominated by disciplined formations and armoured cavalry. The Berserkers' individual fury, while still formidable, became less decisive against well-organised armies with sophisticated tactics. The economic and social structures that supported Berserker training also began to dissolve. As Scandinavian societies became more centralised under strong kings, the independent warrior bands that had often included Berserkers were absorbed into royal armies with more standardised training and equipment. By the late 12th century, Berserkers had largely disappeared from historical records as active military forces. They lingered in literature and saga, often transformed into literary tropes, or even villains rather than heroes. In the Sturlunga saga, compiled in the 13th century, Berserkers are portrayed as antisocial troublemakers rather than elite warriors. The knowledge of preparation and use of Amanita Muscaria for battle purposes appears to have been deliberately suppressed or simply lost as the practitioners died without passing on their techniques. What had been sacred knowledge became fragmented folklore, the specific preparations and dosages forgotten. Yet traces of the Berserker tradition persisted in unexpected ways. Some scholars see echoes of Berserker practices in the war dances and battle preparations of later Norse-influenced cultures. The Scottish Highland Charge, with its emphasis on terrifying opponents through appearance and behaviour, may have roots in Berserker tactics. Even modern military units sometimes cultivate controlled aggression and psychological intimidation that would be familiar to the ancient Berserkers. Most poignantly, perhaps, is how the concept of the Berserker has retained its hold on the modern imagination. From fantasy literature to video games, from military nicknames to sports psychology, the image of the warrior who transcends normal human limitations through controlled fury continues to resonate. Legacy of Fury. The Berserker in modern memory. The Berserkers may have vanished from the battlefield a millennium ago, but their legacy endures in surprising ways. The term "going berserk" has entered everyday language, describing anyone who loses control in a fit of rage. Yet this common usage misses the crucial element of the historical Berserker. Their fury was not uncontrolled, but channeled, directed, and even ritualized. In military circles, the Berserker concept maintains a complex presence. Modern combat psychology recognizes the phenomenon of combat high, a state where soldiers experience reduced pain perception, time distortion, and enhanced strength during intense battle situations. While modern militaries don't encourage mushroom consumption, they study the psychological mechanisms that allow warriors to transcend normal limitations under extreme stress. There's a fine line between the controlled aggression we train for and the Berserker state, explains former Special Forces operator Marcus Torgerson. Modern soldiers need to maintain tactical awareness and judgment, which the Berserkers supposedly surrendered. But that sense of fearlessness, of pushing beyond normal human boundaries, that's still valued in certain combat situations. Sports psychology has perhaps embraced the Berserker concept most explicitly. The pre-game haka performed by New Zealand's All Blacks rugby team draws direct inspiration from Maori warrior traditions that share remarkable similarities with Berserker practices: ritualized intimidation, controlled aggression, and psychological preparation for combat. Numerous modern athletic training regimens incorporate elements of what might be called controlled berserking, teaching athletes to channel aggression and enter flow states where pain diminishes and performance peaks. The difference, of course, is that modern methods rely on psychological techniques rather than psychoactive substances. In popular culture, berserkers have experienced a renaissance. From Tolkien's Bjorn to Marvel's Thor comics, from the video game God of War to countless fantasy novels, the image of the warrior who transforms into something more than human through fury remains powerfully compelling. Even the pharmacological aspects of the berserker tradition find modern parallels. While contemporary military forces officially prohibit performance-enhancing drugs, the history of combat stimulants, from amphetamines in World War II to various compounds used in more recent conflicts, suggests that the desire to transcend normal human limitations in battle remains a constant across centuries. Perhaps most significantly, The Berserker represents something fundamental about the human experience of warfare, the need to psychologically transform in order to perform acts of violence that run counter to everyday moral constraints. Every culture that has engaged in warfare has developed methods to facilitate this transformation, whether through ritual, training, ideology, or substances. The Berserkers, with their bear pelts and mushrooms, their devotion to Odin, and their superhuman battle feats, may seem like creatures of another world, yet they represent an extreme expression of the warrior archetype that continues to fascinate us precisely because it touches on universal aspects of the human experience of combat. The Berserkers stand at the intersection of history and mythology, their actual practices obscured by time and transformed through centuries of retelling. The archaeological evidence confirms they existed as a distinct warrior class. The sagas and chronicles record their extraordinary battlefield performances. The pharmacological evidence suggests that Amanita muscaria could indeed produce the effects described in historical accounts. Yet much remains uncertain. Were all berserkers mushroom users, or did some achieve their battle state through other means? How widespread was the practice across Norse territories? Did berserkers truly believe they transformed into animals, or was this metaphorical language describing a psychological state? What seems clear is that the berserkers represented a sophisticated understanding of human psychology and performance. Whether through pharmacology, conditioning, spiritual practice, or some combination of these, Norse culture developed methods to transform ordinary men into extraordinary warriors. Techniques so effective, they terrified opponents across Europe for centuries. The Berserker tradition reminds us that the Vikings were far more complex than the simple raiders of popular imagination. They created a culture that combined brutal pragmatism with spiritual depth, technological innovation with ancient ritual, individual fury with collective discipline. In the end, perhaps the most appropriate image is that lone berserker at Stamford Bridge, standing between two ages, facing impossible odds with superhuman courage. Behind him, the pagan world of Odin and shamanic transformation. Before him, the Christian era that would ultimately transform Northern Europe. For a few remarkable hours, he held back the tide of history through sheer force of will and the accumulated wisdom of an ancient warrior tradition. Like the Viking Age itself, the Berserkers were both terrible and magnificent, a reminder of humanity's capacity for extremes of violence and transcendence, of our ability to transform ourselves through belief, practice, and sometimes a blood-red mushroom from the northern forests. Whether you're into Norse mythology,